Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the 10 albums by genius English singer-songwriter Kate Bush. Kate Bush was born in Bexley Heath in South London in 1958. Her father was a doctor, but the whole family was heavily into music, especially her brothers John and Paddy, who were a big influence on her early days. By 11, she had taught herself to play piano, and soon she was playing in her brother's bands, playing covers all over South England in pubs and bars. She famously made a demo of about 50 songs, which found its way to David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. He was so impressed that he put some money into a more professional sounding demo, which he passed on to EMI, and they were so impressed that they signed her up as a teenager. They developed her for a couple of years, and then she exploded onto the scene in 1978 with the song Wuthering Heights. And she went on to make a career of sort of quirky, literate music that broke ground sonically and visually. She was also very heavily into videos, and she always had these sort of fascinating performance art videos that she released in tandem with her singles. She's always had a huge disregard for the trappings of fame, and while she's not really been a recluse, she has disappeared for long periods at a time, and she shuns the limelight, has also very admirably sort of stayed out the gossip pages in the newspapers. I think Kate Bush's voice divides opinion, but pretty much everyone agrees that she's a major talent, and undoubtedly British music royalty. I mean, her name is spoken of in sort of hushed reverential tones alongside proper music artists like David Bowie, and I suppose these days there's no higher praise than that. She's never really broken America. I think her music is very un-American. It has none of the tropes of rock and roll or blues and those kind of real intrinsically American music heritages. Heritages, is that a word? I don't know. But you know, her music is full of pop and folk and prog and reggae, classical, new wave. It's a real potpourri of styles. Without wishing to objectify her, I'd be lying if I said that some of her late 70s promotional photos didn't get a lot of young men a bit hot under the collar. And look, she's an artist I deeply admire, and although I don't love everything she's done, I am absolutely on board for the journey and always very keen to find out what she does next. Her music is experimental, it's hard to pigeonhole. When she announced she was going to do some shows in London a few years ago, they sold out in minutes. You couldn't get one for love nor money, but the shows were the talk and the toast of town for a long time afterwards. But, you know, we still have the records, and she's released sort of 10 studio albums, which is very convenient for us, so we can do a comprehensive top 10. Let's get into the bewitching world of Kate Bush then. So at number 10, I'm going to put from 2011, her ninth album, The Director's Cut. This is an easy one to put last, because although it's a good listen and it's an interesting listen, it's an album of reworked songs from The Red Shoes and the Sensual World. She was very unhappy with those records to some degree, especially sonically. They were recorded digitally, and she's taken her favourite songs from those records and re-recorded them with more warmth on analogue equipment. Also, her voice has matured, so her voice has become warmer as well. So the overall sound is one of just a little bit more sophistication and warmth. Having said that, Rubber Band Girl sort of gets this sort of crazy Stonesy treatment. Sounds like a Stones off cut. This woman's work is slower and sparser, with a sort of tremolo piano throughout. And there's a lot of care that's gone into these recordings. And there's clearly songs that she loves. But it sort of has to be last here, because it's not really a new album, even though she claims it is. But it is a good listen, so its 10th place is maybe slightly misleading. It's an interesting listen, particularly. Steve Gadd plays drums on here. Gary Brooker pops up on piano. Misha Paris on backing vocals. But it's 10th in my list. At number 9, from 1993, her 7th album, The Red Shoes. Kate Bush was unhappy with this album herself. She felt that she was trying too hard. And I think really, you know, the key here is this album was going to perform the basis of a live show. And actually, I think a live show that got scrapped. And I think really, with writing with that in mind, probably restricted her and inhibited her sort of writing and imagination and creativity a little bit. Rubber Band Girl feels a little bit pop by numbers for a writer of her ability. Moments of Pleasure is quite affecting. Why Should I Love You is nice enough, but overall it's kind of an unremarkable record, which sort of, dare I say it, drags a little bit in places. And number 8 from 1978, her second album, Lionheart. So as I was saying earlier, she had this demo of 50 songs from which to draw her first album from, and it was such a success, the album, that the EMI wanted another follow-up quickly, as they always do. But she used up all the best songs for that record, so I think she was feeling a lot of pressure to write for this one, and I think the album suffered as a result, really. It's produced by Andrew Powell, but already Kate Bush was showing a very, very keen interest in production and sound, and it wasn't long before she was taking over the control panel almost entirely herself. Hammer Horror on here failed to make the top 40. The single Wow did make the top 20. The album itself got to number 6, and it's the only Kate Bush album that's failed to make the top 5 in the UK. It came out 6 years later in 1984 in the States, because her debut album in the States had not been a success. So the record company really in the States not quite sure what to do with her or what to release when. Kate Bush herself says she's not happy with the album, and it does lack the wow factor, if you'll excuse the pun. But songs like Oh England My Lionheart, they still have that Kate Bush appeal, fascination about them that's sort of quite hard to pigeonhole. And number 7 from 2011, her 10th and latest album, 50 Words for Snow. This is a concept album. It's an album that's reflecting upon the sort of transcendent quietness of a snow-covered hilltop. And it's ambient prog. There's no other way of putting it. Kate Bush has always had a little bit of prog in her music. She was always a huge prog fan. She loved Pink Floyd, for example. The whole record is very lush. It's very ethereal. There's only 7 songs here, but the whole album lasts for over an hour. So the whole thing is, it's a mood piece. You put it on, and if you want to be transported to the top of a snowy hilltop, and who doesn't, then this is the go-to record. The whole record's almost all really just sort of piano and drums, peppered with other little bits and pieces here and there. The single Wild Man was edited down for radio, and it's a song about a Yeti. It's a very sort of quite moving song about a Yeti. Of course it's a song about a Yeti. It's a Kate Bush album. Stephen Fry pops up to narrate here and there. Her son pops up. Steve Gadd's on drums. Elton John plays on this. Andy Fairweatherlow, Danny Thompson. So there's a real gallery of great characters and players who keep this lovely sort of mood piece bubbling along. And number 6 from 1982, her 4th album, The Dreaming. So by now, Kate Bush is in complete artistic control. EMI clearly recognised that they had a maverick talent here and not quite sure what to do with her. I think they just gave her the ball and said, go on then, you run with it and just deliver albums to us when you're ready, and whatever they are, we'll put them out. And sure enough, this record's bonkers. It's experimental. It's difficult to love on first listen, no doubt, but it is weirdly alluring. I think in most other artists' canon, this would be their sort of crazy work of genius. But in Kate Bush's, it's more of just another important step on her way to sort of realising her musical sensibilities with her sort of genuinely visionary artistic compulsions. You can hear, for example, the drum sound developing, the one that she eventually sort of nailed down on the Hounds of Love. You can hear it developing on this record, her moving towards those sounds sonically. There's songs about Houdini, Vietnam, Aborigines with Sat in Your Lap. There goes a tenor. All the Love is probably the most normal song on here. But the whole album got to number 3, went silver. And I think over the years it's been reappraised a little bit. Mojo magazine put it in the top 50 most eccentric albums of all time. And people like Bjork and Steve Wilson have both said this album was a huge influence on there. Dave Gilmour, fun enough, pops up on this one to sing on Pull Out the Pin. So number 5 from 1980, her 3rd album, Never Forever. This was Kate's first UK number 1 album, and it was the first studio album by a female artist to get to number 1. She is co-producing already with John Kelly, and this was the album where she really brought the synthesizer in, and she claims it really freed her up and helped her realise her musical visions. She had been on an exhausting but celebrated tour, and her shows are very theatrical, they're very physical, lots to do, and I think she was quite relieved to retreat to what she called the safe space of the studio and really just buckle down and experiment and work with the synthesizer and get lost in her writing. The album opens up with Babushka, fantastic Babushka. But it's also got the gorgeous lilting Army Dreamers on here, the apocalyptic breathing, the sort of scary wedding list, which is based on the Francois Truffaut film The Bride, Wore Black. And this is quite a personal album, she says. It's probably less lush than some other albums she's made and more straightforward, but I think it more than ever draws upon the literary and cinematic influences that Kate Bush has gone back to her entire career. And number 4 from 2005, her 8th album, Ariel. So Kate Bush had disappeared from the scene in 12 years, and so when this album came back, expectation was really, really high, and it was a double album, much to our delight, and it's a two-parter. It's called, the first part's called The Sea of Honey, the second part's called The Sky of Honey. And what's great is that just like everything else she's ever done in her career, she absolutely returned on her own terms. Not for Kate Bush being sort of cajoled into releasing a big single for her comeback or anything like that. You know, this is another concept album in a way, and it's, you know, she makes no concessions with this record to current trends or styles, and her music remains all the sort of more unique and powerful for it. And on this record, you know, there are musical motifs that appear throughout. It's a very personal album. Songs here about her son and her late mother. There's songs about Joan of Arc. There's songs about pie. And I don't mean apple pie or steak and kidney pie. I mean pi, the mathematical symbol. And that's all on the first disc, and then the second disc kind of musically details 24 hours in a day spent outside reveling in the beauty of nature. And you know, listening to Kate Bush like this, it is like sort of stepping in some magical musical forest. It's dense, it's beautiful, it's difficult to understand in places, can be a bit unsettling, but it's like nowhere else. The album itself was critically acclaimed and still is to this day. It went platinum and was nominated for 2 Brit Awards, and Mojo magazine called it the 3rd best album of 2005. So let's look at the top 3. At number 3 from 1989, I'm going to put her 6th album, The Sensual World. Now this is a good album, I think. I think it's just full of very, very good songs. You have the title track itself, Sensual World, with its woozy, hypnotic pipe melody. The title track's inspired by James Joyce's Ulysses. Then that's followed by the sort of more robust Love and Anger, which is more straightforward, but it has a lot of power in the voice when she sings it. The whole album has a sort of ethereal atmosphere to it, and a real maturity and a femininity as well, I think. Best demonstrated in the stunning song, This Woman's Work. There's real depth and genuine power here that I think rewards repeated listening. The album was Grammy nominated for Best Alternative Music Album, and very alternative. I mean, you've got Bulgarian folk players on here. Dave Gilmour pops up on guitar, Mick Karn on bass, Nigel Kennedy on violin. It's quite a cast of musicians holding up these very, very strong songs. And as such, the album went gold and got to number 2 on the UK chart. So that takes us to our top 2 Kate Bush albums. Well, number 2, I'm going to put from 1978, her debut album, The Kick Inside. Straight off the bat, as we've talked about, she was given much creative freedom, and as such, this is a strikingly odd and unique record for a debut. It meshes pop, prog, and jazz, and folk, and you know, and that extra unique ingredient that is Kate Bush. Wuthering Heights, of course, is the song that exploded from this album and made her a star overnight, and It's an extraordinary piece of music. You can't not listen to it and picture Kate Bush with her hair and her striking face, and then also picture sort of Heathcliff on a windswept English moor. I mean, it's very, very evocative and very, very English as well. One of the things I love about it. It was the first record by a woman, written and performed by a woman, to get to #1 in the UK. The solo on it, which is, but legend has it was by Dave Gilmour, is not. It's actually by Ian Benson, who I think is copying Dave's style a little bit. Speaking of copying, of course, Wuthering Heights and Kate Bush immediately became something to be parodied overnight, and I don't think there's any bigger tribute than that. But this album's full of great songs. Them Heavy People, which I've loved, Osby in Love, James and the Cold Gun, The Shades of Jamie Mitchell on Feeling It, and it's also on Feel It, and it's also got The Man with a Child in His Eyes, which is one of my favourite songs of all time. I can't listen to that song without the hair standing up on the back of my neck and getting goosebumps. It's just stunning. It had a huge impact overnight. #3 on the UK chart, 71 weeks on the UK chart, went platinum, and remains one of her best-selling albums to this day. So those of you who are still with me will know that there's only one album to go, and it's from 1985, her 5th album. My #1 Kate Bush album is The Hounds of Love. And of course, this was her big one. It was a huge critical and commercial success, all over 1 million copies. Brit Awards aplenty. But again, it's such an oddity for a big popular album. It's hard to find, like so much of her stuff. She was now recording at her home studio in Wickham, so she was absolutely the lady of her manor. She was in total control, and she had absolute carte blanche to do whatever she wanted. So imagine how thrilled the record company were when she came back with just a flurry of great singles that opened this album. You're Running Up That Hill, Hounds of Love, Cloud Busting, and The Big Sky. 4 of the first 5 songs on this record were huge singles. And the sound of this record's really extraordinary and unique. I remember when it came out, trying to copy that drum sound in my own home studio. I say home studio, it was a little tape machine and stuff in a bedroom. Oh God, I was only about this big. But I was still doing it at that age, and this was a big influence, this album, on that sound. But also, there's drama on here, and there's romance, and there's lust. The second side of the album is called The Ninth Wave, and it's conceptual piece about a person drifting alone in the sea at night, and it's like Bowie again. She was really taking art pop to another level. Funny enough, this album does remind me a little bit of Bowie's Low, where you've got the first side just peppered with great songs that fly by, and then the second side is much more esoteric and ethereal and something else to sort of get lost in. This is the album that broke the US Top 40 in 1988, and both Q Magazine and NME put it 48th on their greatest albums of all time. Last year, Rolling Stone called it the 68th greatest album of all time. So that is my order of Kate Bush albums. What of Kate Bush outside of her studio records? Well, she made a really interesting live album called Before the Dawn from that tour she did not long ago. And there's a box set where you can get a disc called The Others, which is The Other Sides, which has got covers on it, including covers of Elton John songs and Marvin Gaye songs. And I think, although she's sort of disappeared a little bit now, she's perfectly capable, Kate Bush, of coming back with another classic. She just takes her time. You get the impression she doesn't feel under any pressure at all, and the only rules she plays by are her own. And the only boundaries she has are her own unique talent and musical imagination. So as you can probably tell, I'm a great admirer of hers. So look, that's my list of Kate Bush albums. I'd be staggered if any of you have them in the same order. So let's talk about it. Let me know what order you have your Kate Bush albums. I'd be really interested to find out. But I will be back soon with another episode of Rock Records Reviewed. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.